All right, let's put the women and children to bed and go looking for dinner. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now on a day that we will forever remember in college basketball history. Most importantly, want to remind you to subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on both Apple and Spotify. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. We are the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. Also want you to get engaged and send me your questions in the chat because there are going to be plenty of them as the show moves on. Now, I was fired up when I woke up today. I was excited. I was juiced. I have weeks of preseason travel set up from around the country, and I'm going to get into that later in the show. Going to practices, visiting with teams, having access, having discoveries about little-known guys who may become bigger role players down the road. I was excited about all of it. But there was also a tug at my ankle. A tug at my ankle that once again, just like we saw last fall with Tony Bennett at Virginia, we could have a preseason retirement from a Hall of Fame caliber coach. And that is what happened this afternoon when Bruce Pearl decided to retire from his perch as the head coach at Auburn. His son, Stephen Pearl, will take over as the Tigers head coach. And this now creates an unbelievable dynamic, but it's a dynamic that we saw coming. We saw it coming because now we are starting to see more and more. This time of year is a time of year where you have to have your antennas up. But if you were listening to this show and you were following, obviously, our content from when we started in March, you knew that Bruce Pearl wasn't somebody that was going to be in a situation where he was going to coach for the long term. Because a couple of weeks ago, we had Bruce Pearl on Inside College Basketball Now as a guest, and I asked him, how much longer do you see yourself coaching? You're 65. You could obviously go on to do other things. You were in broadcasting before you went back to coaching. You were, memory serves correct, an executive in marketing at HT Hackney. How much longer do you want to do this?
Not that much longer, John. Just, I think it's kind of a balance of life, of time, of work. I love Auburn. I truly do. Auburn's been unbelievable for us and our family. And part of the thing is I also want to do that when I'm on top of my game. Mm-hmm. And we all coaches, we want to be on top of our game because we owe that to our players and our fans. And so we just as you get a little bit older, you kind of take it one day at a time.
Does going to a second Final Four reinvigorate you and make you hungrier to eventually break through and get to a Monday night and ultimately, hopefully, win a national title?
Honestly, not really. Not really, because
and there you have Bruce Pearl on Inside College Basketball Now a couple of weeks ago. Now, after that conversation with Bruce Pearl a couple of weeks ago, I started to do some recon on the situation. And I made a lot of phone calls, and I came up with some interesting things. Bruce Pearl, as of last week, was still recruiting for Auburn. Bruce Pearl, though, and it was very important to him, wanted to ensure that his son, Stephen Pearl, would be in line to be the next head coach at Auburn. That was extremely important. That is the route that the Tigers are going to go moving forward. And it was not until recently that Auburn's administration agreed to do that. Now, with that said, when we are getting ready for the official start of the preseason, the best opportunity for a new head coach to have a chance to move forward with a team is if he gets to put his imprint on things throughout the duration of the preseason. That is why I knew today could be the day for Bruce Pearl to step down. So as I continued to do recon over the weekend, I did a little bit more research, and I started to learn more and more that Bruce Pearl really, really still enjoyed the coaching, but he didn't enjoy everything else. And he said that a couple of weeks ago here on Inside College Basketball Now. And if you want to go back and listen to that conversation, It's in the archives on both Apple and Spotify and right here on YouTube. So we are seeing more and more coaches at a Hall of Fame level that are financially able to retire choosing to walk away. Jay Wright did it in 2022. Tony Bennett did it in 2024. Bruce Pearl did it in 2025. Now, the amazing thing about those three coaches is this. All three of them have coached in a Final Four in the last 6 years. And two of them, Jay Wright and Bruce Pearl, will end their careers with the last game that they coached coming in a Final Four. And if you look at the career of Bruce Pearl right now, it is a Hall of Fame caliber career. He referenced in that clip, he won a Division II national championship when he was a D2 coach at Southern Indiana. He then took Milwaukee to the Sweet 16 in 2005. He flips Tennessee's program, takes Tennessee to the Elite Eight, and made Tennessee the third relevant program in the SEC at the time, with Kentucky led by John Calipari and Florida led by Billy Donovan. The ending at Tennessee with the NCAA issues was not obviously something of note for Bruce Pearl. He went out of coaching. He came back to Auburn. He became the all-time winningest head coach at Auburn, led the Tigers to 2 Final Fours. But the reason why he's doing this now and not at, the conclusion of last season is because he wanted to set up his son, Stephen Pearl, to be the head coach. And Stephen Pearl now is in a scenario where he is going to go into places that a new coach has never really went. And to think about the degree that Bruce Pearl not just was ready to retire, but was ready to hand it over to his son, you have to look at what Bruce Pearl gave up. Bruce Pearl had 5 years left on his contract. He had over $25 million guaranteed. I can get, obviously, the exact figures, but I know it's over $25 million still guaranteed. But coaches who get to a certain place in terms of their situation financially, in terms of the energy that they have, they don't want to be in this landscape longer than they have to. And in doing the research that I did over the weekend, Bruce Pearl still loved to coach. Bruce Pearl still loved to be in a situation where he was able, to mold young men throughout the course of a season. But he said it a couple of weeks ago. You have no time off. You have no opportunities to get idle time and get away. Because as soon as the season's over, and in Auburn's case, Auburn only returns one player of significance to Hod Pettiford from last year's team that went to the Final Four and lost to Florida. One player. That means you have to recruit a whole new team. That means you have to allocate money for a whole new team. These are the situations now that lie in front of these coaches. And make no mistake about it, it's a big loss for college basketball. It is a big loss for the SEC, a conference that got a record 14 teams in the NCAA tournament last March. But now we are seeing a changing of the guard, and it's going to be a guard shift to Stephen Pearl, a guy that I've known for a long time, who's a terrific guy, who obviously has had his imprints all over Auburn's success under his father, Bruce Pearl. He's been the defensive coordinator for the Tigers. He's obviously somebody that for a long time has been ready to be a head coach. But just like when Kellen Sampson takes over for Kelvin Sampson at Houston, we are going to be objective and we're going to say these are waters that no first-time head coach has ever swam in before. And I think that's fair to say. There might be other examples in history, but you have to look at what Stephen Pearl is undertaking right now. He is going to be a first-time head coach going into the SEC, and he's going into the SEC in a year, coming off a season where 14 teams made the NCAA tournament. And look, I'm not ready to say that for all intents and purposes that the SEC is going to get 14 teams in the NCAA tournament again. But I'll tell you this, I expect the SEC to be a double-digit big lead in 2026. And now Auburn is going to be right in the middle of that with a first-time head coach. A first-time head coach who, again, has great potential, but he's going through this for the first time. So who are you going up against in the SEC? Right now in that conference in the SEC, there are 8 sitting head coaches who have at least taken a program to the Elite Eight. And before that, we are looking at, in my opinion, probably the toughest non-conference schedule that any first-time head coach has ever faced. And that's what's ahead for Auburn and Stephen Pearl. This is what you got. Houston in mid-November and Birmingham. There's multiple games in the Players Era Festival in Las Vegas. Oregon and Michigan are guaranteed. Those are 2 top 25 teams right there in Vegas. Will Wade and NC State loom in the ACC SEC Challenge? That game will be at Neville Arena. There's also a trip to Arizona on the road. There's also going to be a trip to Indianapolis at Gainbridge Fieldhouse to take on Purdue. So you are looking at Auburn, teams that Auburn is going to face. There is going to be right now a minimum of 6 games in the preseason against teams that are currently ranked in the top 30. And that's what's sitting ahead for the Tigers. And I'll say it again. This is swimming with great white sharks. And one thing you have to do on a day like today, if you were an Auburn fan, is be grateful to the man. Because of Bruce Pearl, Auburn basketball didn't just return to relevancy. It went to places that I don't think people thought Auburn basketball could go to. It's what he did at Tennessee, but he took it a step further. At Tennessee, he went to the Elite Eight, and he lost in 2010 to Michigan State. He also, though, won championships at Tennessee. At Auburn, he got to the Final Four twice, and that is unheard of. And not only did he get to the Final Four twice, but in 2019, to get to the Final Four, the first time Auburn ever went for the first time in school history, Auburn was in a scenario where Auburn beat Kansas, beat North Carolina, and beat Kentucky when it went to the Final Four. And this year, Auburn entered the NCAA tournament as the number 1 of number 1 seeds. So I think if you're looking now to totality of Bruce Pearl's run at Auburn, you are looking at somebody who did one of the great building jobs of the modern era in college basketball. Irrelevancy when Bruce Pearl went to Auburn in 2014. And then gradually you saw a team compete at the top of the SEC. And then eventually you had the breakthrough in 2019. And you obviously had the breakthrough in 2025 when Auburn went to the Final Four. There were bumps in the road along the way. There was a loss in the first weekend of the NCAA tournament with Jabari Smith and Walker Kessler to Miami in the round of 32. There was the loss to Yale in 2024. But you have to remember this. Auburn got to the point under Bruce Pearl where it was consistently a single-digit seed in the NCAA tournament, and last year was the number 1 of number 1 seeds. This is going to be a day to celebrate if you're an Auburn fan. You can't be mad at your coach for doing this now. Bruce Pearl did it now because he wanted to tee things up for his son. And because Bruce Pearl, and I could tell this when we had him on this show a couple of weeks ago, had gotten to a point where he said, you know what? I'm 65. I've made enough money. I'm the all-time winningest head coach at Auburn. I've been to the Final Four twice. It might be time to do something else. He said in a video that he released that he is not going to be running for Senate, which a lot of people thought he would do. He spent time in the media before. He worked at ESPN prior to going to Auburn. It would not shock me if Bruce Pearl comes back and is a big part of the college basketball media in the future. And now he hands it off to his son, Stephen Pearl, who will have as pivotal of a preseason as Auburn has had and as any program will have over the next month. Because, look, I had Auburn ranked 16, and I'll keep them there because they're returning an All-American, Tahad Pettiford, and a guy who transferred in as the Big 12's leading scorer, and Keyshawn Hall, a transfer from UCF. But this is going to be as heavy of a lift as we have ever seen for a first-time head coach. And I'm going to keep saying that because I'm going through the non-conference schedule and what's ahead. Houston and Birmingham. Then you have Michigan and Oregon in Las Vegas. Then you have the ACC SEC Challenge with Will Wade coming to Neville Arena and Darian Williams. Then you go to Arizona to take on Tommy Lloyd's squad. Then you go to Gainbridge Fieldhouse to take on Purdue. It's tough to have a good holiday season when that is your stretch from just before Thanksgiving to after Christmas and before New Year's. And on top of that, the SEC is in a scenario where I want to point this out. I've got now in my Rothstein 45 in excess of 12 teams in the conference ranked of my top 45 teams. Looking now at what I have ranked, Oklahoma, and I'm doing a countdown on all my social media platforms. Oklahoma today checked in at 42. The only teams from the SEC that I do not have ranked among my top 45 teams in college basketball are South Carolina and LSU, and then Georgia and Vanderbilt. Now, Georgia and Vanderbilt, though, are coming off NCAA tournament seasons. So I've got 12 teams from the SEC ranked in the Rothstein 45. And this is all what awaits Stephen Pearl. This show is about you, the college basketball fan, so I want to make sure we get to your comments, your thoughts on Bruce Pearl's retirement, what it means for the Tigers moving forward. Your thoughts, your comments are next. Get into the live chat. Get involved. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now. Your thoughts are next.
Only CBS Sports can bring you big time during the heart of Saturday afternoons. It's big time.
It's big time. It's big time. It's big time.
On CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
Jon Rothstein back here on Inside College Basketball Now, talking about Bruce Pearl's retirement. We are now going to go into the live chat. There's a lot of Auburn fans right here who are not doing really well. Let's get some questions right now. Here we go. Wow, I did need to see that coming since Dwayne Russellberg. Well, Dwayne, you should have seen it coming because obviously Bruce Pearl was in a situation where he mentioned on this show that he didn't see himself coaching for much longer, and there's been rumors of this, but he made it official today. Dwayne also says what made him want to retire just before the season starts this year. It's because he wanted to set his son up, Steven, for the opportunity to be the next head coach at Auburn. That's what this is about. That's what this entire thing is about. Griggs Blankenberg wants to know, John, can Auburn retain most, if not all, the current squad with a 30-day portal opening? Well, that's an interesting point because when there is a head coaching change, kids can go into the transfer portal. That would be uncharted territory considering that the school year has already started. You would hope that because Stephen Pearl is on the staff at Auburn that those kids would be loyal to him. But, you know, their coach, the guy they signed up to play for, Bruce Pearl, opted to retire before the season. So nothing would be off the table. Nothing would be off the table. There's a lot of Auburn fans, in my opinion, that are obviously frustrated right now because of the timing, and I understand that. But you have to understand, if you're an Auburn fan right now, this was a honeymoon period. This was a period where, for all intents and purposes, your program went to a place where it had never been before under Bruce Pearl. They had done things from a national relevancy standpoint that had never happened in terms of multiple Final Fours, in terms of situations in the NCAA tournament with single-digit seeds. And now there's going to be a major period of transition. Now, I understand the concern. I understand that there's going to be some apathy that you hired somebody that was a head coach that has never been a head coach before. But these are the things that you're going to have to deal with. This should be a celebration for Auburn basketball, but the reality is going to set in as we inch closer and closer to the dynamic that awaits Auburn. And that is a brand new head coach, a talented one in Stephen Pearl, going through as arduous a non-conference schedule as I have ever seen for a first-time head coach. Ever seen. Another question. This is from Johnny Dent 825. As an Auburn fan, the timing really doesn't bother me. It's always going to suck no matter when it happened. I understand that, but some people might look at this and then go out and say that, you know what? If there was the opportunity to hire a brand name head coach we could have done that in the spring after Auburn made the Final Four. Now, one of the things that we see frequently in college athletics, especially with the transfer portal, is that when a coach takes a new job, the entire roster is gutted. Gutted. That means you are going to see situations like Mark Pope had last year at Kentucky, like Darren DeVries had this year at Indiana. When you take over a new job, you are going to have a scenario where you're going to have to replace 10, 11, 12 players. That's what you're looking at. 10, 11, 12 players. 10, 11, 12 players. And now you're in a scenario where that is the dynamic. That is the dynamic. So for all scenarios, if you hire a new coach to replace Bruce Pearl and you celebrate Bruce Pearl, you are going to be in a scenario where you are going to have to replace a whole roster. If Bruce Pearl wants to be in a scenario where he gives his son the best chance to go forward as Auburn's steward and the best chance to go forward as Auburn's head coach, he is going to need to be in a situation where he keeps the roster together. And that is another reason why this was done today, to be in a situation to keep the roster together. And that's where we're at right now. If you're an Auburn fan, you celebrate Bruce Pearl, you celebrate the head coach, but you also know that there is going to be some growing pains here for the Tigers moving forward. Johnny Sports Network says, why after a Final Four appearance are they a tournament team this year? I thought Auburn was going to have some growing pains here. I thought there was going to be a bit of a dynamic where, Auburn was going to have to adjust to a degree with this new team because you don't have Janai Broome, you don't have Miles Kelly, you don't have Denver Jones, you don't have Dylan Cardwell. None of it is coming back. You have one player of significance back, and it's Tahad Pettiford. And now you have a scenario where you are starting all over again. I thought there would be growing pains for Auburn. I thought Auburn, and it wouldn't have shocked me, would have been a team that would have gotten into the NCAA tournament, but it wouldn't have shocked me if it was between a 7 and a 10 seed on Selection Sunday. Auburn was getting the benefit of the doubt with this team because Bruce Pearl was the coach. You like Keyshawn Hall. You like Keyshawn Murphy. Obviously, Tahad Pettiford is going to be a preseason All-American. But now you look at the dynamic, and you've got a scenario where, for all intents and purposes, you've got a first-time head coach with an inexperienced roster that hasn't played together. I'm not saying it can't be a good team, but I am saying you are looking at big game after big game after big game for Auburn from about the middle of November to the middle of December, right before you get set for the SEC. It is a big-time dynamic going on right now. Big Meach says, John, what are your thoughts on Stephen Pearl as a head coach? I think Stephen Pearl's got great potential as a head coach. He obviously had a major hand in everything that Auburn was doing on these multiple Final Four runs. I don't think there's any denying that. But you're asking somebody to be the guy who follows the guy. In sports, you want to be the guy who follows the guy who follows the guy. Now you're going to be the guy who follows the all-time winningest head coach in Auburn history, who's also his father. Now you're going to be the guy who is following the head coach who just led Auburn to the number one seeds on Selection Sunday. Now you're going to be the guy who followed the guy who led Auburn to the Final Four. These are not easy shoes to fill for anybody, let alone Stephen Pearl, especially when you look at that schedule. And I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to keep saying it. Houston, Oregon, Michigan, another game in Vegas, NC State at Arizona, and then Purdue in Indianapolis. I hope he drinks vodka. Last thing here before we get to some other news and notes. El Veta says, in his video, he said he's retiring because he couldn't give 100% anymore. I wonder if the team already knew. The team had to have an idea, but the team, from everything I gathered, found out today with everybody else. So it is a changing of the guard. It is, again, and I'm going to say this again, it is another Hall of Fame coach who is stepping down without for all intents and purposes here, stepping down because there's a little bit, I think, of exhaustion from the job and what goes with it because of all the things you have to do in addition to coaching. And we are losing coaches now left and right here in the last 5 years. Think back to the last year where we lost Leonard Hamilton and Jim Larinaga last year during the season, and then Tony Bennett in the preseason. Now Bruce Pearl, 65, with over $25 million guaranteed, steps down to make way for Stephen Pearl as Auburn celebrates one era and shepherds in a new one. I'm going to come back with some news and notes here around the world of college basketball, some non-Auburn topics. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you. When you need your sports in a snap, find it on CBS Sports HQ, streaming free anywhere you are.
All right, let's get to 3 good nuggets now around college basketball as we have obviously taken a big deep dive here on Bruce Pearl and Auburn. Some injury news from Illinois. Brad Underwood told me last week that Andrei Stojakovic, who recently suffered a knee injury, is expected to be fully cleared and back on the floor in a couple of weeks. That's good news for Illinois. This guy was obviously a marquee transfer from Cal, averaged just under 18 points a game. He will play a big role here for Illinois under Brad Underwood. The Illini should start in most teams' top 25. The Big Ten goes to 18. The Big Ten announced last week that all 18 teams will play in the Big Ten conference tournament. This is a change. Last year, only 15 teams from the conference played in the Big Ten tournament. That means 3 teams will not be left out. So all teams from the Big Ten go into the conference tournament. And then nugget number 3 is scheduling nugget from the triangle. NC State, which is entering its first season under Will Wade, is going to have a little bit of an interesting leg up on the rivals in the triangle. NC State will host Duke in North Carolina this year in Raleigh, but won't have to go to Chapel Hill or Durham. That will only make a big difference if NC State is competing for an ACC regular season title. I'm not quite there yet for the Wolfpack, but I do think that's a significant note as things are looking to be built under Will Wade. Now, I am, as I mentioned at the top of the show, going on the road this week. I'm going to fly out tomorrow, see a couple teams practice out west. I will be at Arizona tomorrow. Wednesday, I'll be at Grand Canyon, Arizona State. Also going to visit with the Utah State staff and also then go to Utah where I will see Utah and BYU, a team that we've talked a lot about on this show. Probably the most highly anticipated season in the history of BYU basketball. So I will be back with all sorts of nuggets and things like that from around the country when I return with you next week. But we will have much more content on Inside College Basketball Now throughout the week with multiple episodes. So again, I want to remind you, please subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on both Apple and Spotify. We are the only college basketball podcast that is coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. Again, I'm Jon Rothstein, and this is Inside College Basketball Now.